hear me here? Yes? Is the mic working? Good? Or am I just talking really loud? The mic is working. Okay, now the mic is working. Okay. So you might be wondering why a photographer is moderating this panel, according to your agenda. That is my superhero identity. I am otherwise a mild-mannered reporter who writes a column about technology, and I have a website called Tech News TT, which reports on developments in local governance and technology issues. I think it might be useful for me to introduce these folks here for anybody who doesn't know who they are. Kurleigh Prescod has held senior management positions for both public and private sector telecommunication organizations in the Caribbean. His various disciplines include engineering, regulatory affairs, sales, carrier services, and business development. He's also served as a postgraduate course director at the University of the West Indies, UWI, and served as general manager of Flow's Grenada operation for 3 years. At Columbus Communications, Kurleigh oversees voice, video, and broadband network operation and performance, facilities, outside plant design, construction, maintenance, and restoration, as well as providing support for carrier relations and regulatory functions. Is there that anybody else does there? That's everything there? Okay. Kurleigh holds a Bachelor of Sciences degree in Electrical and Computer Engineering from the University of the West Indies, and a master's degree in Telecommunications from the University of Maryland, USA. That's Kurleigh there. Kim Mallalieu, our lady on the panel, has a BS in Electrical Engineering from MIT, MS in Optics, University of Rochester, PhD in Electronic and Electrical Engineering, University College of London. She's the Deputy Chairman of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. She is a Fulbright Fellow and Senior Lecturer in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of the West Indies, where she leads the academic, commercial, and outreach programs in communication systems. She has served as head of department and led the development of the Masters in Telecommunications Regulation and Policy, coordinating its delivery to participants from over 30 developing countries around the world. Dr. Mallalieu has led many institutional, national, and regional initiatives designed to build capacity for ICT-enabled developmental interventions and innovation. She was a founding member of Diálogo Regional sobre Sociedad de la Información. That's close enough, right? Close enough. And as principal investigator of the Caribbean ICT Research Program, is engaged in multidisciplinary action research revolving around regionally appropriate strategies and technologies in support of development, with an emphasis on longitudinal pathways for equity and inclusion. She is, in short, the mommy of ICT in Trinidad and Tobago, and she is well-deserved on this panel. George Gobin, who is not here, so I don't have his thing, but that's Patrick Hosein. I don't have a bio for him here, but anybody who doesn't know Patrick Hosein should just leave the room. Kirk Sookram currently holds the position of Executive Officer, Technical Services and Development at the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. He's been employed. He's a national of Trinidad and Tobago. His qualifications include a Bachelor of Science degree with honors in Electrical and Computer Engineering from the University of the West Indies, and a Master's of Science degree distinction in Operational Telecommunications from Coventry University, United Kingdom. During his tenure at the authority, he has specialized in spectrum management, wireless technologies, telecommunication regulation, ICT and broadband development, cost modeling, and policy development. Kirk also serves as the chairman of the Caribbean Spectrum Management Task Force, established by the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. So we have a high-profile group of folks up here to have a conversation and field questions from the floor. You should have these, which come in different sizes according to your tastes, on which you can write questions, which will be passed to me, and I will pose them to the panel. Let me ask the members of the panel if they have any statements or overview, things that they'd like to share with you before we begin the question and answer process. Anyone has anything they'd like to share? Kurleigh?
I have one comment to make. despite the introduction, I'm actually here in the capacity of the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Internet Exchange. So I'm not representing Flu. The introduction was all about Flu, yeah. But I'm actually here representing actually the industry.
So there is something else you can do besides all things you have to do for Flu?
That wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making was that I'm actually representing the wider society of the internet service providers as the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Internet Exchange.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes. Any comments anyone would like to share about these issues? There's a headline discussion here, which is the role of the internet and the digital economy in Trinidad and Tobago's sustainable development, which may qualify as the non-sequitur of the decade. Does anyone want to weigh in on that as a statement?
Yeah, let me just start off the discussion a little bit. Welcome, and Tracy mentioned I'm here representing MAG, but I'm also kind of representing the .TTCCTLD as CEO at TTMAG. And in a way, this is sort of like a grandchild of TTMAG because the MAG was kind of formed to develop policies for TTMAG, and then the MAG developed this the TTIGF. But I think it's important that we try to move things along in Trinidad with respect to the internet and ICT in general. One of my major beefs is the fact that credit card, and so in order to develop the digital economy, we need to have easier ways to accept digital payments. So via TTNIC, we have to use foreign credit card agencies, and with all the new tax laws, etc., it's becoming more and more difficult. So these are some of the issues I think we need to solve. And I know we've been talking about it for years now, but I think with the TTMAG, we could start moving that along. Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone else want to weigh in on the broader topic before we start talking about electronic transactions? Not at this point.
I guess I'll jump in on Patrick's lead just to say, on behalf of the members of the Trinidad and Tobago Internet Exchange, we absolutely and firmly believe that the ICT sector, the information and communication technology sector, absolutely can play a role in fostering economic and social development. From a social perspective, I mean, there was a launch up to just yesterday, and I had the benefit of interacting with the folks from the Caribbean Telecommunications Union on it, about using technology, ICT, to allow differently abled people to communicate and interact. So that's one aspect of social development. And from the economic development, we absolutely believe, again, that the ICT sector creates a wealth of opportunities to generate employment, to innovate. And I really want to use that word specifically to the point that Patrick just raised about electronic transactions. I think too long we've sort of relied and tried to copy or just do what the rest of the world does, when I think we have sufficient tools within country to innovate and enable electronic payments beyond just credit cards through the traditional international gateway providers and avenues. So I absolutely believe that, and we absolutely believe there are a number of avenues in which the ICT sector can contribute, but we as a people, as a society, need to be prepared to innovate and to push the envelope and to think outside the box and think differently. But once we are prepared to do that, we definitely believe there are a number of ways in which Trinidad and Tobago can benefit.
Okay. Let's see if we can drill down into some sort of brass tacks thing. Patrick talked about electronic transactions. Are there other ways that we could be innovating or other areas that we could be exploring to expand e-commerce, to expand our capacity in that regard?
Well, I would like to say that quite apart from the electronic aspects and the services that revolve around ICTs, I think for me the more important issue here, certainly from a sustainability standpoint, as well as from a national identity standpoint, is for the ICT services to work in collaboration, very close collaboration, with sectors that have nothing whatsoever to do with ICT, yes? The entertainment sector, which is quite independent of ICT, for example. There are looking at the areas that we have localized national niches, and then in those contexts to contemplate the interventions of ICTs and the support of ICTs. So I think that is a conversation that this is a conversation that cannot be separated from that conversation.
Are you suggesting then that there should be some sort of larger initiative emerging from the ICT sector to reach out to folks who may not be enabling their services and possibilities using ICTs now?
No. I think that at the overarching level, we have to understand that ICTs are not an end in themselves, and that for any of the fruits and the rewards of the development of the ICT sector, they can only be realized in conjunction with parallel developments in all of the other sectors in our country.
Okay, agreed.
And simply to map what is being done in other countries around the world is just completely inadequate. It has to be contextualized in our own realities.
Okay. Let me ask then that to move that forward as a concept and as an idea, who should drive that? Should we expect folks in those fields to embrace ICTs, or should ICT-enabled people be looking at opportunities and possibilities within Trinidad and Tobago that they could tap into and assist?
So not to overstay my welcome, right? I'll just answer this very quickly and then back off. But the answer to all questions of that nature, in my mind, is that it is the parallel effort of top down and bottom up. Mm-hmm. So the only reasonable way forward is for at the top that facilities are enabled for the bottom to reach the top. Mm-hmm. Yes? So it really is, the responsibility lies in 3 dimensions. It lies everywhere and with everyone.
Yeah. I wanna endorse that point. All hands have to be on deck. Mm-hmm. No one can sit back and say, let's wait for government. Because government can't develop. Government, they could, right? But I mean, really and truly, it wouldn't be as responsive and as wouldn't be as targeted as we needed to be, and as robust and as efficient and as innovative as it needed to be. We can't rely on government for innovation. As Dr. Mallalieu said, government can facilitate, government can create the environment to encourage. Maybe safety nets can be put in place, so when guys try to innovate and things don't work out, you're not on your own, but you're given avenues in which you can continue to innovate and develop and to try again. Because, almost every single successful entrepreneur says, on their way to their successful venture, they fail 3 or 4 times. So we have to be prepared to invest, we have to be prepared to support, but all hands have to be on deck. So the ICT sector has to reach out to these other sectors that Dr. M is talking about, to sensitize and allow these other sectors who have no clue. They've been doing things the same way for 30 years, and they feel this is how it has to be. So there has to be that outreach from the ICT sector with support from government sector, so guys can appreciate and say, yes, this is how things can be done better. We can reduce costs, we can reach more markets, or so on and so forth. So I think all hands have to be on this. That has to be the answer here.
And to take a tangent from Kurleigh, in terms of this policy-driven approach, and this is what government can do, what regulators can do, what policymakers can do. That plays a critical role in building trust as well as reducing risk for those entrepreneurs. So there's work that has to be done in terms of legislative framework that should be put in place to foster these new innovations, new ideas, so it becomes something sustainable. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of regulatory work to create the fundamental environment or the fundamental platform and infrastructure that could be used as a tool, because that is what ICT is, a tool to enable, as Dr. Mallalieu had indicated, all sectors. because it pervades all sectors, or it can pervade all sectors. So that is a critical role that the policy-driven or policymakers have to play, or need to recognize. And that recognition could be of their own volition, or that recognition could be due to the interest, and this is building on the bottom-up model, the interest of the entrepreneurs in terms of driving the conversation, agitating the need for certain things to be put in place. So this is where it comes as both halves of the whole have a critical role to play.
And yeah, let me just bring in academia, and nobody mentioned academia.
No, well, academia is everywhere.
But I think they will or should be playing a major role in innovation, entrepreneurship, etc. And I'm happy to say that our present principal is all for that, all for entrepreneurship, innovation, and so we expect to see some good things happening there, especially in the ICT space. Electrical engineering, computer science. I think we should be playing a more dominant or a bigger role than we are right now.
Just as a side point, Mark, you use the term to coin Dr. Mallalieu, mom of ICT. To add to that, Kirk and I are actually students of his. So, so she's really and truly.
I didn't want to get into age or anything like that. So.
I ain't giving enough.
Young enough.
Young boys.
We're young boys. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask a question about government. It came up in the discussion. We talked about policy making. Do we feel that government, and we don't mean this government, we mean governments as a serial entity, practicing governance over, among other things, ICT, have proven to be receptive to these concepts, have proven to be open to concepts that we could describe as disruptive? We have a lot of things hovering around. Some have landed like Uber. Some are still to dominate in any significant way like Bitcoin. But these are all technologies that are fundamentally changing the way we approach traditional systems. Do we feel that government is open to this? Do we feel that government is making policy quickly enough for this? Do we have ideas about how the government should begin to approach these things? Okay, that's a lot of quiet.
No,
Am I stepping on toes?
No. I am happy to jump in there. I think in defense of government, I would say, while they may have not developed, be quick on the legislative front or whatever, I would say government has been very accommodative of disruptive technologies, in the sense that when they come in, government doesn't step in and bar and block. They actually say, okay, something has come in, let's engage, let's review, let's see, what should we do as a result? But I think just observing the ICT space over the past maybe 10 to 15 years, as disruptive, technologies or opportunities have arisen, I have not really seen government take the approach of, well, this doesn't fit our legislative framework, so let's stop it. They've actually, in my experience, have been, okay, fine, our laws are behind, but let's see where this goes. Maybe let's start talking about what laws should be suitable. I know in some cases, the ICT, the actual source or provider of whatever ICT product, they may say they want government to do more, and in those cases, they would feel frustrated. They would feel as if government isn't helping them make their product or whatever adopted wider across the space. So they may ask for legislative or regulatory relief, and in that regard, that is where they may complain. But I would say that when they have entered, and we talk about the Ubers and so on, we don't see government giving the police an instruction saying, you know what, log on to Uber, summon taxis, and anybody who shows up, give him a ticket and jail him for 2 nights. You don't see that, right? They make
giving them ideas now.
They make statements saying, it's not really within our legal framework, but they have not jumped in to say, let's shut this down, right? So from that perspective, I would say government has, yes, and I think the law and the legal frameworks being slow and having to respond to changes is not unique to Trinidad. I think that's worldwide. What I would say, in my perspective, where government wouldn't break down the door to facilitate an ICT initiative, they certainly haven't nailed up doors to block them either. That would be my 2 cents or my view, and I'm open to disagreement or counter views as well.
I concur, and I also feel that government is an easy blame. I mean, whether they deserve it or not, it's an easy blame. And there are, in most cases, very much more that can be done outside of that bottleneck, so that all of the bottlenecks, in fact, in the entire system can line up. And it's not this serial set of bottlenecks which inevitably ends up with everything taking far longer than it must.
Any other member of the panel?
What I'd probably like to add to that is that, yes, there's a lot that government, I guess sitting closer to the policy making side, yes, there's a lot that government still has to do. But notwithstanding that, there's a lot that entrepreneurs, persons that want to get into the space can do on their own. I mean, if you just look at your daily lives and how you interact with business, for example, there's a lot that is happening in terms of social media, in terms of building businesses, utilizing that tool. Just the other day, I was on Facebook, and there's persons selling landscaping services. Right, so there are entrepreneurs out there, there are persons that are willing to utilize the tools, utilize the technologies to build this so-called digital economy, right, to get into the e-commerce space. But recognizing that it doesn't depart from the reality that there is work that the government needs to do, right, from the legislative standpoint, as well as the regulatory standpoint, as well as creating initiatives. It could be from the sense of incubators, or it could be from the sense of as Kurleigh was indicating, reducing barriers to entry. And this will get us over this so-called critical point where it is you can hopefully open the floodgates for getting really into the digital economy and seeing the benefits of that.
Yeah, I think three of them already covered government, but one thing I would like to add is that I think the government needs to spend more R&D on science and technology. I think we are lacking in that.
You're suggesting specific allocations for research and development?
Specifically in science and technology.
Okay. Can we talk a bit about network neutrality? I've actually covered some news about Canto and the code of practice which has been signed on by Digicel and Cable and Wireless. What are your thoughts about how that is progressing? Do we feel it's moving quickly enough? General considerations.
Maybe I should go first here. Well, network neutrality is definitely a contemporary issue, and it more or less shows where technology is going, where services are going. We're moving from the traditional networks where you have to pay for a service, and it's a traditional network provider like voice, right, to new innovative technologies that don't necessarily need to interact directly with those carrier platforms in order to provide the same service. And that is happening in all spheres of ICT services, with voice, data, and video as well. So this has brought to the fore this issue of network neutrality, where it is how should these so-called over-the-top services be treated when it comes in comparison to the networks that basically provide the internet access to the end user. And it's the end user who acquires these services. And where do these carrier platforms sit in the middle of that conversation, in the middle of that transaction? And we all know it's a very hot topic. It would probably be a topic for discussion again, even from the US. Because as we saw recently, just a couple of days ago, they basically appointed a new chairman of the commission. And from all the articles and the readings, he wasn't so much a proponent of the current FCC net neutrality rules. His forte is more along the lines of deregulation. So even there, where we would think that the US has established, if we want to say a format or a template or precedent that others could follow, and that some have already followed. For example, when you look at the new ECTEL legislation, right, it somewhat mirrors those FCC net neutrality rules. And you would find that that would more or less set the tone for discussion in several quarters. For us, we're fortunate as well where Canto has taken a step forward to give us some sort of baseline to start that discussion. And what I can say for Trinidad and Tobago, particularly the Telecom Authority, we started the discussion with OTT, over-the-top services, particularly voice over-the-top services, and that has now morphed into the broader discussion on net neutrality. And that's something we're working on this year. So our process is usually with research, we present a proposed position, and then there's consultation, public consultation by all our stakeholders towards the objective of finalizing a position that will speak to the regulatory environment in Trinidad and Tobago. Right? So there's a lot that is happening that is going to happen in that sphere, even locally in Trinidad and Tobago.
You could go down. So, Jing, hoping to say something.
Well, I noticed you cited the Canto signing that they did last year and the press releases that came out. And obviously, the messages and the words and the statements used within those releases were very positive in the sense that, yes, we support net neutrality, network neutrality for all legal services. But the words were very carefully selected as well, right? And whereas many, glean from the releases that came out, the very positive thrust of the message, they were, as I said, they were, words were very carefully chosen because, as Kirk talked about the over-the-top services. The question that next arises based upon the Canto position is what is legal versus what is not legal, right? And what the Canto's position very clearly was they support net neutrality for legal services. So then when a service is not deemed legal, I guess there will be a discussion as to what is deemed legal, who determines the criteria for what's legal or not, and if it's deemed not legal, then what, right? Is it, free, whatever the market decides, who knows, right? The other thing that, and this is now representing the members of the TTIX, who all in general are, members or represented to some extent, whether actively or otherwise, by the Canto, is network neutrality is not, there's one line that we've always talked about, which is on a network, there are a number of services, and network neutrality is all about making sure that the services are treated fairly, right? So in other words, no one service should be treated preferentially over another service on the same network. So that goes to say, and it gets very interesting here in Trinidad and Tobago, right, that where for a particular service on a network, certain guidelines or restrictions are imposed, that those similar guidelines and restrictions should apply for other services on that network, right? And I'm going to get very specific with my example because our members are all multi-service operators, or the majority are multi-service operators. And the majority of us provide subscription broadcasting as well as high-speed internet, right? And where last year, the authority, rightfully so, put in specific mandates to say there are certain channels or content that you do not have the intellectual property rights to broadcast, so stop broadcasting it. So that was one service on the network. The same networks we were operating. So there's the network, there's one service on the network was cable television. Stop broadcasting that content. Therefore, on another service on the same network, our high-speed internet, should that content be continue to permit to be shown, to be distributed, right? So if we're talking network neutrality and we're talking fairness, then the same conditions that are imposed on one service on the network should apply to other services on the same network. So this discussion is going to be very, very, very interesting in the upcoming year. We look forward to the authorities' promised consultations on the matter. And we really want to see how this thing arises. Right? Because if we're talking network neutrality, are we really true and fair and honest to the principles of what network neutrality states? And that will be my position on that today.
Any comments from any other members of the panel?
I think that fundamentally, network neutrality falls within the regulatory regime are these services or networks subject to regulation, and if so, on what basis and in what manner? And so I would always go back to what I think are fundamental issues. One is the behavior anti-competitive. So I struggle to appreciate the point outside of that context. Is the behavior anti-competitive? If it is, we don't accept it. And there are thresholds to determine what is anti-competitive or not, and those are rather well established. The other issue really is that the internet technologies are based, from my little knowledge, are based on the notion of different quality of service and the basis of efficiency. Propagating data through networks that are highly redundant, have multiple pathways, and is effected on the basis of efficiency. So I think that intrinsically traffic management at the network layer is an obvious strategy used in internet-based technologies. So to think that we should not do that, I think is strange, right? So traffic management outside of anti-competitive behavior, to me, is expected.
Yeah. So my interest is more on the technical aspects. You come up with these policies. How do you detect violation? And you just can't go into the ISP and look around. They wouldn't allow you to do that. The other issue, of course, is Kim brought it up, and I think we have a slight difference on this. But the traffic management, network management, it's easy to hide violations within the network management aspects or traffic control. Once you start throttling, for instance, one content provider as opposed to another one, how do you detect that? So I have a couple of students working on that issue, but we have to be careful. There are two things: the QoS and the content provider, whether you treat them fairly or not. All right, and it's two different things. So you can't provide, if I pay more for better quality of service for my cellular service operator, then yeah, I expect to get better service, and that's given, all right? And that's the QoS side. But I think what we're talking about here is on the content side, the ISP or the wireless operator must ensure that he doesn't treat service from one content provider differently to another content provider. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to hide that differentiation on the access side or when you provide it to the consumer. Because you could claim, oh, well, you happen to be in bad radio condition, so that's why this stream is not as good, whereas they're actually throttling. So it's a difficult technical problem, and I think that's, it's nice to have all the policies in place, etc. But if you can't enforce things, then it's useless.
We have a first question in from Twitter from Irwin Williams. It's rather blunt, actually. What are the reasons we haven't enacted the legislation for e-payments in Trinidad and Tobago yet?
Well, maybe I can probably step out of my crease to hazard a response.
Batawin?
You're brave, buddy.
And remember, we're talking about legislation here, and all legislations follow a certain process in every government. They follow a certain process from the inception to the enactment. So in terms of what I call the necessary e-legislation to help reduce that risk, increase that trust in terms of using ICTs, and this is primarily from the traditional uses of ICT, so non-traditional sectors. You need certain pieces of legislation in place. E-payments is one of them. All I can say in addition to that is that we're rooting for this government to drive the e-legislation framework that has been established. We've gotten that indication from them. There's a lot of individual pieces of legislation that has to either go forward towards promulgation, has to be fully promulgated, because in addition to e-payments, there's data protection that has to be fully promulgated, e-transaction legislation that has to be fully promulgated as well. So this is, I guess, what we're entrusting this government to drive forward, and it's based on the indications we've received from them in taking the ICT agenda forward.
I have a question on that, though. Now, I can't answer the question specifically, why haven't e-payments legislation been passed? I mean, they've been drafted, they've gone through various stages of debate many times, and so on and so forth. And I mean, government is its own, I guess, animal, maybe. And I believe certain sections and certain parts of various pieces of legislation have been proclaimed, yeah? So it's not a simple question just to say e-payments legislation haven't been passed. You know, there are certain aspects of certain pieces of legislation that have been. But I guess my counter to that question, and I guess they say you never answer a question with a question, but is e-payments legislation really stopping anything in terms of electronic payments in Trinidad and Tobago? Because there are people processing payments online, including TTIX, which is a state body. So TTIX right now has an online portal that you can go and pay your TTIX bill with your credit card online. Now, yes, there may be certain new business opportunities that may be prevented by certain e-payments legislation being passed, but the market is moving ahead. The technology is moving ahead. I could speak on behalf of our members. We have 8 members. 6 out of the 8 members take online payments, right? So we process payments online with your credit card, right? We also, even if you don't have a credit card, you can pay through your online banking account, right? So which is another form of e-payment. You log into your online bank account, you select your provider, you make your payment, and we get your money within a day or two. So, and it comes back to my very, very first point I made, about innovating. There are means by which technology can be used to achieve the ends that we are trying to achieve. We don't, and I want to coin Dr. Mallalieu's point, government is an easy blame. Yeah, it's all great to say, government should pass e-payments legislation. But there are e-payments going on today by state agencies. And there are avenues by which we can use to develop and even push forward our electronic payments agenda within the current legal framework using the current existing tools and technologies. We just have to be, as a people, be prepared to innovate and not just say, government. That's an easy blame. Yeah.
Anyone else on the panel? Wayne?
Well, I would like to suggest that Kwesi comes and has the opportunity to just add some richness to the conversation, if that's allowed at this time.
There's a microphone right in front of you, Kwesi. Thanks a lot. Both Dr. M and Kurleigh are correct. Government is easy blame. The real question I thought Kurleigh was going to ask, because the fundamental real question that the initial question begged was, what does the person mean by e-payments? Kurleigh raised the point that e-payments happens now. Whenever you go to a merchant and you use a links card, you're using e-payments. When we use credit cards, we're using e-payments. When we use a bank transfer through the online portal, we're using e-payments. But there are types of e-payments which aren't evil. And the challenge we have with e-payments right now is that how it negatively impacts the gap in e-payments that I think the person is referring to is the inability of a micro SME or an individual to collect payments in a manner where if they don't have an online merchant account, which is expensive. There are legislative things that need to be done to make that, to create the ecosystem that would then facilitate actors in the sector to then facilitate e-payments. Because I want to reiterate,
The E-Transactions Act does not and will never enable e-payments. So what is needed is something else, both from the legislative and market side. So which is I want to build on something both, again, Kurleigh and Dr. M said. It's about creating an ecosystem. The ecosystem is not just legislation, it involves actors doing particular functions. So once we identify, so to close, because I don't want to take too long, I've taken too long already. The person asked the question, and they mentioned e-payments. The real question we should ask is, we should go through a process of proper problem identification, so we can identify what the appropriate solution is, and then it'll be fairly easy for, as Dr. Mallalieu said, the bottlenecks to line up, and what can happen without legislation. I am aware of a very innovative system that is being used, that is being developed right now, that is actually being used for this carnival season, that does 80% of what that person is probably asking for. Why not 100%? We do need the legislation, but 80% of what he's probably asking for can be done if you align the bottlenecks so that you can get through. And I'm just going to close this by saying, because I'm not seeing any bankers here, one of the big problems to innovation, getting the proper finance.
Okay, we have another question from YouTube. I rather suspect this is properly addressed to the Minister of Communications, but what does TT implement inclusive of policies to meet the Sustainable Development Goals? From Glenn McKnight via YouTube.
Could you read the question again?
Sure.
I want
What
to
does
understand
Trinidad and Tobago implement inclusive of policies to meet the Sustainable Development Goals?
Keyword there is implement. Oh, you are
That would be as
addressing
opposed to plan. Okay, from the silence on the panel, I'm going to assume that that's a question that we need to defer elsewhere. Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. What's the role of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago with regard to e-payments in your view? Should the Central Bank only regulate the banking sector, or should they also encourage the banking sector to provide more e-services to the public? That's all.
And again, this is getting to, I guess, a very web of legislative discussions. And I guess, central bank, its primary goal, its primary objectives obviously wouldn't be to sort of direct banks how to run their business, right? They have central functions to do in terms of managing the country's, fiscal resources and so on. But in terms of, directing the banks to say, we want to see more e-payments, that's really somewhat out of the mandate, out of central bank. So that's the answer to the question directly. Having said that, central bank does have a role, right, in, I guess, promoting the use of e-payments, right? I mean, obviously, government being a considerable collector and disburser of revenues and funds and all that kind of stuff, central bank absolutely can be a role and can be a major proponent of electronic payments. If it's on their particular roadmap to say, you know what, we're going to start pay your taxes online with your credit card, you don't have to come in and so on and so forth. Or with your debit card, as the case could be, where they just set up as a payee on online banking, central bank, and so on. So I absolutely think central bank can play a role in stimulating additional e-commerce activity, all right? And I guess in terms of the legislative gaps or whatever that exists, if they were to say, yes, we will be on a drive to push e-commerce payments, and there are legislative gaps that need to be filled, they can work with the relevant agencies, and actually they probably are wannabe agencies to help develop that legislation, to plug some of those gaps, to allow and enable themselves to be a body that conducts transactions via electronic avenues.
I mean, what I can add to that is, in the same way that the Telecommunications Authority is the regulator for the telecommunication broadcasting sector. Central banks serve as regulator for the financial sector, financial institutions. So we believe they play a critical role in promoting what is coined digital financial services. You will hear about technologies like blockchain technologies, Bitcoin, bits, they use those type of technologies. You would have heard in certain jurisdictions, particularly like in Africa, the concept of mobile money, where it is the telecommunication service provider, the mobile operators, they get involved in providing those sort of financial transactional services. So one of the key, to take a word from Kwesi, the actors in that discussion will have to be the regulator of the financial sector. So central bank will play a critical role. And I believe they open or entertain discussions in that regard, particularly when it comes to these blockchain technologies and companies like this one out of Barbados, we heard of last year,
Bitcoin, yeah.
Yeah. So they have to be part of the discussion.
Anyone else on the panel care to?
Yeah, no, I know I had brought it up in the beginning about credit card payments, and what Kurleigh said is true. We can't accept credit card payments online. My concern is that most of us have to do it with foreign credit card processing agencies. And I think Kwesi brought up this point that we need to be able to process those payments internally and not have money go to some other country and come here. It's not necessary, and it's costly.
Okay, indulge me with an observation here, and let me ask a question emerging from it. We've traditionally had a triangle of commerce and governance. You've had government, you've had your private sector. It's cutting out. Yes, you've had your private sector, and you've had your consumers. The fourth estate was deemed to be the media, which is an observer of all three. Let me suggest that gatherings like this are the beginning of the emergence of a fifth participant in the process, the ICT sector emerging from the server room to take a more active role in decision-making and guiding policy, in opening up discussions about things that are increasingly going to affect all of the traditional sectors. Does the panel feel that there is a specific role or way or approach they should be taking toward what has been a kind of ad hoc emergence and formalizing it into a more specific and direct coalition that speaks to the shared interests of the ICT community and directing that towards other sectors of Trinidad and Tobago, which may not be as fully cognizant or aware or agile in their thinking on the subject? And don't ask me to repeat that, Dr. Kim. I can't.
Well, I'm just wondering why, outside of today's gathering, I'm wondering why you select the ICT sector. I mean, what I see is this is the multi-stakeholder. I see it as civic society, using understanding and appreciating the very important but not singular role of ICT. So I just wouldn't want, because we are here and we're all involved in ICT and we all understand the power of it, I wouldn't want us to say that we would orient or position the ICT sector alongside the public sector, the private sector, the media, as another entity in a foursome, So that's the struggle that I'm having with the proposition.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Any other thoughts from the panel on that? No? We're good? All right. If anyone in the room has questions, you could come to the mic. Yeah? There's someone behind you, and I'll be happy to take your comments and discussion there.
Very pleasant good morning to everyone. Kevin Swift from LACNIC, but of course in the IG Forum, I'll be presented as my own capacity. And for those in the room familiar with policy, bear with me because you know a little something about simplify, complicate, simplify. So bear with me a bit. It's a comment and question. And I think Dr. Kim started to touch on the comment just now. We often use the term network analogically in internet governance, and therefore discussion seems to be focused on attributes of stakeholders, what academia should do, what government could do, etc. And this makes the assumption that we just have to work on social cohesion issues, and then everything will be all right. However, traditional public policy formulation, and as Kwesi mentioned, the ecosystem in TNT is broken. If we take the e-trans example, electronic transactions was listed on the parliamentary schedule in 2001. It has been partially proclaimed in 2011. Probably will be fully proclaimed in 2021, by which time the basis for which it was proposed would no longer be relevant. So it's broken. The policy process for internet and internet-related policies is complex and disruptive. And in the e-trans example, as an issue area, the ICT Policy Authority does not have local standard to address contract law, taxation, insurance, and these are the issue areas that come up under this specific example of electronic transactions. So my question really is, how does Joe Public, and not the usual suspects, because I'm sure we're going to see each other in the next couple of weeks or months, how does Joe Public coming in from the street make a contribution to internet and internet-related policy? And what are we here in the room trying to do to encourage that sort of activity? Are we just going to create a committee and produce a report? So my question is really one of governance. So just looking forward to any thoughts on that matter. Thank you.
Anyone?
I would say, not in answer to the question, but just in contribution to the point, is when I walked in today, I was thrilled to see Rakaya, who is one of my students. The first thing I asked her, are you missing class today? And she said, no, she has no classes on Thursday, which was a relief. But the thing is that I was really thrilled, and I saw another one of my students, and I was really thrilled to see two students here. And teaching is not just training, it's mentoring, it's providing exposure and opportunity for the young chronologically or young in an area of development to participate. And mentoring students in whatever context to expect a lot of themselves in terms of participation, contribution. So when we have fora like this, and I always say, I've said it to the CTU, I've said it to Canto over the years, etc., is what we really need to always do is carve out a space with the expectation that students will participate. Now, that's only one part of the general public, but the principle extends. That the conversation, and this is why I took the exception with your comment about the ICT sect. I think this really is, these are issues that affect everyone in the society, and everyone should have an opportunity to participate. We will always have cases where the vast majority of the society will choose not to participate, perhaps until something happens for which they are all, a large percentage of them, up in arms, as we have seen. 250,000 here, 500,000 here, up in arms after the fact. But this is human nature. So we must understand two things. It is our responsibility when it is that we are curating ideas and soliciting views to be as participatory as possible. The other is to understand that in human nature, the vast majority of people may likely not wish to contribute, even with cajoling and incentive.
Yeah, let me add to that, Mark. So yeah, speaking of my TTMAG hat, I guess, one of the primary objectives of the TTMAG is to facilitate input from the man on the street, to get all the stakeholders involved in making decisions about the internet, about ICT in general. And but you know, we need input. We need help from people like yourself to help us do that.
Actually, there's a question from Glenn McKnight again on YouTube. What about special interest groups, for instance, people with disabilities, consumer groups, etc., having a voice on the policies? I imagine that speaks to your concerns about TTMAG being all-embracing.
Yes, so TTMAG is a multi-stakeholder advisory group, and it's supposed to involve all the major stakeholders with respect to the internet. We have a look at our website, but the idea is that we want to have as much participation as possible. Now, of course, we can't invite everybody to join the TTMAG as a director, but as a member, you can join and help us participate and help us to bring the views of the man on the street into the ICT decision making. Yeah, so that's what I was saying.
I would like to say one more thing, if you will allow me, and then again I'll shut up. The thing is this, that yes, you can solicit views in an event, you can schedule and have a venue and solicit views and get views and record them, etc. The more powerful, the more authentic, the more legitimate way to really get the views of the people is to have view seeking and view expression as a cultural artifact. So, for example, I was in the Netherlands last year. I was minding my own business in one of the subway things. And a gentleman next to me, we struck up a conversation. And in the conversation, he told me, he said, I am happy to pay taxes. And you would know in the Netherlands, the taxes are extortionate. And he said, I am happy to pay taxes because I don't want to see poverty. I don't want to know that I am in any way contributing to poverty. That is a cultural expression. That is an expression of the culture of the Netherlands, and it is pervasive. So what I am saying is that yes, we can solicit views in a forum. The more important thing is to work on the culture. And you will say, oh, we can't change culture. Nonsense, we can't change culture. 10 years, 15 years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago, when we started initiatives like we did a regional competition for mobile innovation. This was a long time ago, right, in the early part of the century. And then we followed that with the open data code sprint. We did the first Teluos code jam with Teluos. We had, in fact, we conducted the second, I think, or third IGF in the Caribbean. All of these things. I remember one of my colleagues, Professor Sinclair King, asking me at the time. He said, what is the point of this? What is the point of this? Because if you have a programming competition and you have a team that wins and they get $1,000 US, what does that do? We have to have this whole infrastructure, top-down led, where there are routes for these winners to develop their companies and do this and that. And I said, but you are missing my point entirely. And my point is this. How you change culture is you do it slowly, without the expectation that it will be done overnight. If you want something overnight, don't look to change culture. If you are prepared to not expect overnight action, then be prepared to be able to change culture. Now, on Monday, I know I'm talking too much, so I'll be very brief. On Monday, I sat down for the whole day in interviews, NASA interviews, interviewing Trinidad and Tobago citizens for internships in NASA. All of the students who are studying anything remotely like computer science, right now, they are students, and they're doing so in Trinidad, have participated in the Teluos Code Jam. It's just a standard thing we expected. You understand what I'm saying? You're going to tell me that culture hasn't been changed? Culture has definitely been changed. So I am saying that it is entirely possible for each person in this room, within their spheres of influence, to exert the expectation that you express your thoughts and your positions on all matters that count. And if we do that, and we agree to do that, let us have the conversation 10 years from now.
I think we should count ourselves fortunate that Dr. Kim is wearing a lapel mic. because she would have dropped it at this point. So let me just, emerging from that, say that if you are involved in a special interest group and you are not involved in TTMAG, consider this an invitation to join and to participate.
Just I mean, to comment on Mr. Swift's point, though, about how does Joe Public get involved. I think there are avenues. I think a lot of the regulatory and government agencies, they do public consultations. I guess, use the example of the Telecom Authority. You know, most of their policies, and, you know, once they embark upon this over-the-top consultation, it is published. They give people opportunities to respond. And your comments are published, right? And the regulatory agency is arguably obligated to respond to your point, right?
Nice hop, skip, and jump there.
Yes, they're somewhat obligated to respond to your point, and he does say, well, really and truly, your point is kind of off base because of X, or you're spot on, and we incorporated it, right? And to take Dr. M's point a little bit, if you are interested, there are avenues to contribute, right? And yes, we can, and forums like this are excellent so that, you know, those who are interested get a chance to participate even further rather than just submitting a response. So you get to interact, you get to build networks and so on. So this is very useful. But I think there are the channels and there are the means by which you can submit your comments, be on the record, and ensure that your points are taken into account. You know, I could even, I mean, make shouting out Dev in the crowd. You know, the Trinidad and Tobago Computer Society, anytime TATT produces an issue that impacts their users, they contribute. They don't take the approach, that's just TATT and the operators. They make sure to voice their concerns, and they make sure to show up at the ICT forums that TATT hosts and so on. So I think if you are interested, there are a number of avenues and channels. And as I said, it's more than just, especially in a public consultation, that like when TATT does a policy, your comments have to be published. And they have to respond to it, even if they just say, we disagree, right? They actually have to respond, and it's on the record. And being on the record, it goes on to say if someone of influence actually agrees with your point, they could actually turn back around to TATT and say, well, they actually TATT, you know what? I agree with that guy's position. You need to reflect your policy and change your policy. Because you would have submitted your contribution, it would have been published, and they would have stated their position on it. So I want to say, Mr. Swift, that if there is interest, there are the avenues, and it's just a case of continuing to participate and make your voice heard.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, good morning. Craig, Yui, Caribnog, internet researcher, whatever. Today, first, congratulations on the forming of this TTIGF. I think this is a really fantastic opportunity, and I'm glad to be part of this inaugural meeting. My question, however, is closing the gap from the consumer point of view. And yeah, there are some avenues, but I just want to talk to you about two recent experiences. So the regulators have said that they've put policy in place, signed the agreement for number portability, right? But who ensures that the service providers are actually implementing this? I tried to do it, nothing, okay? But TATT says, yeah, we have number portability.
I have to decline comments on that.
Let me just...
I have stark interest in that, so no comment from you on that one. Yeah.
The second example. Yes, we do have persons who are using the technology and, you know, innovative and saying, oh, go online and pay for certain things. And I recently decided to go to the movies with my daughter. And we said, yeah, Mom. She said, Mom, we could probably go online and purchase tickets. And there was a facility to purchase tickets online. But there were no discounts for no promotions, plus there was a fee for online payments. So who is actually dealing with some of those issues? So it was in my interest to leave home early and get to the cinema in time so that I could line up and purchase my ticket. It saved me $30, just for my ticket, plus the money that I would have paid for the online payment. So we are saying that, we are encouraging innovation and we are encouraging our entrepreneurs to use the technology, which I am happy for. But how do we as consumers, what should we do to help them to recognize that, listen, if you're going to be encouraging people to use technology, then you have to make it something that they are going to want to use. Okay, so that's the one. And then the second one is, how do we ensure that when we sign these agreements, like number portability, that they implement it? Thank you.
Panel?
Well, I've been obligated to respond to the first question, which was reiterated at the end. In terms of new services such as number portability, the regulator would be more than likely the proponent in terms of seeing those services, I guess, present in the market. And in some instances, for example, with the TTIX, we're able to do that via a collaborative approach with the service providers, with the industry. And I'm happy to say that went well, so kudos to Kurleigh and his group there. In other instances, it needs to be more from a regulatory or legal standpoint. And this is where agreements come in. This is where the regulator may have to make determinations. And in all those determinations, you have what is supposed to be in place and deadlines, of course, and you also have what remedies will need to be effected, if at all, for those who don't comply. And I'm happy to say for mobile number portability, that was kicked off on cue in terms of the date that we finally agreed on. Fixed number portability, there's still some teething problems there. And that is something that the regulator is actively pursuing with all the parties that have to play a role. Unfortunately, it's not as swift as we would have liked it, because as everything else, especially when you get into the legal discussions involved, there's a lot to consider. And in that consideration, there may be some time that is required to ensure that when we move forward with everyone moving forward, as opposed to we have persons that we just leave by the wayside. Because at the end of the day, what we want to see is a successful consumer experience.
TATT does have a formal consumer complaint system, does it not?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And
is that system online?
The process in terms of the service providers are the ones who first have to have their consumer complaint handling procedures. So obviously, subscribers of services will go to their service providers with whatever complaints they may have. And if those subscribers aren't satisfied with the responses they get from the service providers, then they can escalate those issues with the telecom authority, who will undertake resolution on their behalf. So that's in effect the process that we have in place at the authority to treat with consumer complaints. And we have been receiving complaints with regards to number portability, and we're endeavoring to treat with them to have the matter resolved.
Any other comments from the panel on the issues raised there? No? As a person who is entitled to a discount, who has been late going to a movie, I feel your pain. But I feel that's a letter you need to address to Mr. Chinley about that payment process. Yeah. There's a gentleman in the back who's been waiting for a while. Is that someone? Was a hand coming up? Yes?
Oh, Owen.
While we're waiting for him to come to the mic, just to respond to the second point that Claire raised on, the use of the technologies to make things pervasive. I think the market has a role to play there in the sense that, all right, so Movie Tongue in that example, they charge additional fees to purchase tickets online. So now if Caribbean Cinemas 8 had a similar online facility and weren't charging fees, over time, Movie Tongue will stop charging fees,
That's
right?
That's
so
right.
Not everything will necessarily be regulated. If CC8 were to put a 10% or CC10, because I know there's the one in South, were to put a 10% discount for buying online within 24 hours, and sales start to go towards CC10, bet your bottom dollar movie tongue would fall in line. So I always like to take a step back to say, and I really want to, on this whole e-payment thing, there are things in which the market can do. Patrick talked about, yes, they take online payments, but they're dealing with a international overseas payment gateway provider. Well, I guess we have to deal with an overseas payment gateway provider because the provider of credit facilities are international companies, multinationals, MasterCard and Visa. As long as you're going through MasterCard and Visa, even if there's a local payment provider, that local payment provider still has to deal with MasterCard and Visa's, payment processors, right? So if it is we want to get away from dealing with those international gateway providers, then we have to be prepared to innovate. I want to give you a perfect example of where Trinidad did innovate. I moved to Grenada in 2009. It actually was in the biography you read, right? And in Barbados, there was no links. I could not go to Scotiabank and withdraw money from my RBTT at the time account, Grenada. I had to actually go to my bank to withdraw money. And that was a case where Trinidad, through Infolink, the organization of Infolink, innovated and built that network between the banks to process payments across banks. So I use that example to say that if we are prepared to think out the box and prepared to develop systems and mechanisms to enable the e-commerce environment that we like to, then it can be achieved. And I personally, where I sit today, yes, it would be nice if the government put all the laws in place and everything. But I still think that courts and these guys could have online payment facilities using the debit card infrastructure we have today. Yeah? So let's not just sit back and be complacent and say it's government, right? We can do things. And there are opportunities for innovators to do things, including, Kwesi talked about the SMEs. There is an opportunity for someone to say, let me provide a product for SMEs to have an online payment channel, right, where people can pay through their online bank account and we will distribute the funds through the SME. So there are opportunities and we need to stop sitting back and saying, let government and e-payment legislation and start to innovate and work together. Now, it would be nice if, whether through academia or whatever safety net, that there would be some sort of protection to allow people to jump in that sphere and innovate. But it doesn't have to wait for that to innovate. We can be prepared to innovate and jump in and provide that service. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
And while sorry, forgive me, can I? Yeah. So while that is happening, which is bringing up the bottlenecks to line up, in parallel with bringing up all them bottlenecks to line up, it is incumbent on those who are complaining and have grouses to express those in very clear and emphatic terms, as opposed to expending the same amount of energy or more in complaining. Apply that energy to formal channels, and these formal channels now include social networking, the social networking channels, to put pressure on whichever entity is responsible for the most severe bottleneck. If it happens to be government, then that's where you apply your pressure, not in closed rooms over a drink of whiskey.
Someone had some question?
Hi, morning everyone. My name is Williams. I am one of the guys who runs Telios School Jam. We've been doing it for, I think this is 9 years now. 1 year, I think this is 2 years ago, students had, they participated, they may have won, but they came very close. And they went, so let's say that Telios School Jam was in October. A month or so later, there was the National ICT Forum. And these students went up in the forum and they said, we won Telios School Jam. What next? Largely because the frameworks around that they see, they read TechCrunch and they're on Reddit and they see things happening, they don't exist here. And the challenge we have is not that these students who build these solutions, and they're fairly innovative, don't have anything else to do. They'll go work for a bank, no offense to banks. They'll go work in a school, they'll just go off and do something else with their talents. So it's not that people aren't innovative.
Yes.
It's just that the barriers to innovation are such that they'll just go on and do something else with their talents. And what happens to us is we then don't have the capacity to respond in a timely manner to challenges that present themselves, and we end up buying solutions or just not having a better way of living life. It is very difficult for a student team or team just coming out of school. They have good ideas to go ahead and not be able to show how they will pay for those ideas.
Yeah.
The Movitown example is classic because Movitown just doesn't want to pay for the cost of the ticketing service, so they pass it on to the consumer, and it costs to even get into those services. So you're asking an innovator, and most times these students who are innovating, they're technically minded, they're very gifted, they could do really good stuff, but they don't have the business acumen, or they don't care. It's not that they don't have, they just don't care to go ahead and run down somebody to get money, to invest in them to go and do the cool thing, and they don't do it.
Sure.
And we end up losing out
Sure.
in the long and short term. In terms of this particular meeting, it says the role of the internet and the digital economy in Trinidad and Tobago's sustainable development. But I didn't really hear much talk about the goals of Trinidad and Tobago and so our development goals. I wanted to kind of add one. Much of our competition and ideas around building services seem to start at, let's build a thing for Trinidad, or build a thing for needs we see here. And one of the things we do, I'm sorry, I'm at Telecommunications, so I work on Telecommunications School Jam, and we build various kinds of software services and solutions. Our solutions are used locally. Many of you get SMS with alerts about your bank account balances, that's Telecommunications, in addition to the carriers and so forth. But beyond that, we provide those same services throughout the region, and we're open to anybody else who comes to us around the world. And I think one of the goals we need to have is building services that are exportable, digital services that are exportable. We could talk about all the areas that could come from carnival and culture and all that cool stuff. But for that to happen, those creators need us to convince them that we have the capacity to do those things. As it turns out, if you tell a mass man, well, I could take your costume and digitize it and make it 3D and create it in a game, he will laugh at you, he wouldn't believe you, until you actually do it. So I think we have a role to play in convincing the society that we have the skill that it requires to do the things that we're telling them can be done. Which of course means spending some nights after work, most likely writing code, making cool things if that's what you do, and then saying, hey, look at this thing I built. And then somebody will say, hey, that's real, that's true. So I'm hoping that I hope to get more involved in TTMAG. One of the things we can do is have times when we show off what has been done here to kind of create that awareness that when you say I want to build something, there's someone here who can build it. I think I could go on and on, so I'll stop there, and thank you all for this meeting.
Thank you.
I fully agree with 100% with everything you said. Good contribution.
Kurleigh was very unsettled during that talk. Chris, that's good. Owen, right? I think Owen's point dovetails and reiterates, strengthens Dr. K's point earlier about culture change and the need for culture change. Because what I think Owen's fundamental or core challenge is not something government can do either. I know there's talk about creating incubators, but these incubators tend to be top-down driven and end up having a predetermined vision of what they think is cool or not. And once you have somebody adjudicating on what's cool, it's no longer cool.
Yeah.
Cool, and I'm an 80s child, that's all. My definition of cool may not be a definition of cool of another generation. But to me, a cool thing, and a cool thing that will then become monetized. Because that's what the kids want. The kids want to do something, see that it can be monetized so they can continue doing it.
Yeah.
Because once I can do it, I was once working in a ministry, and they had all these visions about what they could do with ICT. And they said, if a person gets up in the morning with nothing in the fridge, and they can't use ICT to put bread on the table that evening, they're not going to care about ICT. It's a cultural shift. And we have to understand how to create the solutions. So the long and short is, Erwin, I believe
reiterates the fundamental point that, to answer the question, the role of the internet and digital economy is really to help engender a change in culture. Now, stuff that Patrick spoke about and Kirk spoke about, which I'll talk about, institutional systems that need to be put in place, are part of that cultural shift. But I think, to me, what I'm hearing is that the role of the internet and digital economy is to change the culture so we're more risk-taking. We have a culture, if you don't pass SEA, you're stupid, and that's branded for you for life. If you don't get enough ones in CSEC, you're dumb, and that's branded. So we have a culture that where we reward success and we totally penalize failure. What about, whereas everyone we idolize, Steve Jobs and so forth, failed. Somebody mentioned it. Good.
Yeah,
right? They failed. I had a friend I was going to university with, American guy, and he was doing about five entrepreneurial activities, right? And I'm like, guy, how are you doing all this stuff? He said, if I bust, I'm only 28, I can start again. And that was a blow mind to me. Because at 28, if I bust, oh shit, I bust. Everybody would say that man bust. And in Trinidad and Tobago, that's the end of you. So we have no innovation. So we actually encourage stasis as opposed to innovation. So, I think, again, I would like to postulate, I would like to step out of my shoes and get out of place, because I'm always passing out of place anyway, to suggest that the answer to the question, what is the role of the internet and digital economy, is to create that environment to engender a culture of risk-taking, of trying, failing, trying again, getting it right, and so that we can ultimately change the culture of Trinidad and Tobago. If Rhoda Barrett could make the president come out and speak as what she say on Facebook, why can't we, as all of us, engender such a change? I'm out.
Yeah.
Yes?
So yeah, I think let me talk about it's a little bit of an advertisement. Yeah, but let me talk about something that TTNIC is also doing in this space. We formed this group or lab. It's called TT Lab. You can look it up, lab.tt, where we try to attract bright students who have lots of ideas. And this is a combination of students within UB. We have returning scholars. We have some, students in foreign universities. And the idea is to collaborate. And our focus last year was mostly on publishing. So we have several publications. But this year we're going to start focusing on patents and innovative products, etc. We already have one patent, the concern is a lot of these students, they have good ideas, but they're afraid to take it further. And so the hope for TT Lab is to allow them to, for instance, when they submit a paper and if it gets rejected, they get depressed, and I tell them, no, it's no big deal. Mm-hmm. A lot of these conferences, the acceptance rate is 20%. Mm-hmm. So so that's what we're trying to do on our end, and it's expanding. And in fact, we do have a research preview next week, Friday, so you're invited to come, where we'll talk about, we'll present all the publications over the last 6 months. But yeah, I agree with a lot of these comments about innovation, and we need to take these bright people and not only get the ideas from them, but take it forward.
We have 5 minutes before we're supposed to stop. I have a question from YouTube from Abdullah Mohammed. Can anything be done to influence foreign companies like Google to include TT dollars in revenue earning services?
$50,
He's not in the room, so I can't. You wanted to weigh in on that?
Narami Hari, Trinidad and Tobago Internet Society chapter member. I think he's talking about the payment in TT dollars, which YouTube being an international organization, of course, when you collect revenue, it's done in US dollars, and then that has to be converted to TT dollars when it's paid, and of course there's a fee for that. Just weighing in, I just threw in a little 2 cents here on the whole online payments. It's a multifactorial problem. Someone asked, what could the central bank do? And I've been having discussions with the central bank and many other parties on and off since 2005. The central bank has classifications for organizations such as commercial banks. They have a classification for credit unions. What we are missing is that there's no real classification for what you would call a third-party payment processor, which is essentially what you go to sign up to create a merchant account. That leads to a whole bunch of issues. The long and short of it is, if you want to get access to the central bank directly, you need to put up a certain amount of money to cover if there's fraud in the transaction. I believe it's like 50% of whatever they're trading value. So that gets very high very quickly. So that's, part of the financial headache of it, if you will. There's the legal aspect because there's no classification as far as I know. And, the relevant parties could probably correct me if I'm wrong, that there's no legal precedent for the creation of such a company, But one thing everybody doesn't talk about, and it's something that was always very blatantly obvious for me, people will say, well, I can go to PayPal, I can go to these outside companies, and they can process the transaction. And I said, yes. And we're talking here about our economy. We're a small island state, right? What happens every time PayPal takes their 2% or their 3%? Right? They're talking about charging us taxes for online payments, but they're not talking about this hidden drain on every single transaction that comes out across the board. Yes, sir? And that, if anything, should be the reason why they should push more to facilitate local mobile and online payments, if anything else, just for the drain on our economies.
Thank you. All right. At this point, we have a lot of people who want to weigh in. All right, we just have a few more minutes, please.
Good morning. I'm Sylvester, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Cybercrime. Just to make the point, and I just want to point out the same thing with Movitong. The Legal Affairs Department of Trinidad and Tobago has a portal where you could sign up to do searches, land, businesses for the last few years. And to actually go through the process, you need to go in their office and pay by the cashier to actually get funds on your account to be able to search anything. And that's our government. And you're actually paying more than if you actually go there in person as well. Right? Now, but looking at the whole idea of e-payments throughout Trinidad and Tobago, if 2 government departments are actually processing e-payment or some part of it, then we don't really need legislation. We just need to re-engineer some of the other state organizations so that they will accept e-payments. Because it can't be that 2 departments alone are right and then the rest of the country is wrong. We are not waiting on legislation, we are waiting on the private sector and entrepreneurs to come up with some kind of innovation, to speak to the technology and to pull government forward with them. That is what exists in the US, Canada. Bitcoin didn't sit down and wait for the central bank up there to tell them, well, you could go forward. They stepped forward, and then the government came and met them. Uber came down to Trinidad. They stepped forward, and everybody's running to meet them now. And the same thing that needs to take place in Trinidad. That's my point.
Thank you.
100%.
We had one.
Morning, and since the 5 minutes almost run out, Rabindra Jagannath, independent IT consultant, also a member of the board of directors of TTMAG. And I actually was jotting down notes here, and I wanted to keep quiet as much as possible, but one of the ways it was raised by the speaker just now, our banking sector is one of the major problems that we have in this country. And you talked about a variety of different e-payments and so on. Infolink, which is owned by the banks, have actually on several occasions put forward the opportunities to actually implement other forms of e-payments for the banks and so on, and they've all refused for whatever reason. Now, part of my problem is that I suppose at old age and so on, I'm getting very impatient for things to happen. Things take a long time to happen in this country. And the point I'm trying to make here is really leadership and influence. And I'm not blaming government for anything except that government does really put themselves in a position where they take blame for a hell of a lot. But the government can influence a lot of what happens in the banking sector. Now, I'm also saying that the public can also influence a lot of what happens in the banking sector by actually pressuring the banks to do things differently and more cheaply and so on. And interestingly enough, the end of last year, there was a certain amount of agitation with the banking sector and the charges that they wanted to charge. But let me talk about government's influence in the banking sector. If government feels that electronic payments and in the various forms and so on is beneficial for the country and so on, they can influence the banks to come on board. But our government takes a very passive approach to that, and their perspective tends to be, and I heard this from a permanent secretary a couple of years ago, when I complained to him that our banking sector is ultra-conservative. It's no longer conservative, it's ultra-conservative to the point that we have a regressive financial sector in Trinidad. His point was, well, look, they're conservative, but look what happened in 2008. With the global financial meltdown, very little effect happened in Trinidad. And that is because of the way in which the banks were operating. But that was 2008. Times have changed. The banks have got to change. But government is a major player in getting the banks to do things differently. And unfortunately, our government view their position as very hands-off. Central bank views their position as very regulatory and so on. And nobody is influencing the banks to actually do things differently and to offer a greater variety of e-payment services that will actually benefit not only the individuals and so on, but certainly benefit e-commerce, the e-commerce uptake in the country.
If I can say that my response to that, not that I was asked necessarily, but is that the responsibility in a case like that, to me, resides with the people. Right. In Latin America, there is an expression, take to the streets. In Latin America, the people are not satisfied, they take to the streets. In our case, I think we should take a page out of their book and do the same thing, but in a figurative way, not taking to the street, but put the pressure on government. If you have identified that government is the bottleneck and the problem and the beneficiaries of the solution are the people, it is the people to exert pressure on the government and not to look at government and continue to see government continue to be lethargic. We are the ones who have to exert pressure on our government, is what I think.
And point very well taken, and I didn't mean that government have to be the one to be driving. So we have to drive our government to do the right things.
That's correct.
And that is where the biggest cultural change has to take place in the country, because we are very passive when it comes to situations like that. We accept a lot of things. We are willing to pay the banks $25 per check on certain types of accounts and so on, rather than push back to the banks that this is actually horrendous, especially when you're making billions of dollars of profit. I might be a social democrat. I feel that actually you should cap the amount of profit that the banks make so that they can plow back the rest of the money to reduce the amount of charges. But that's another story.
So, Tracy, this is a point. This is something that, we could start right here with the TTIGF, Tracy, exerting pressure on the government.
Yes. Before Tracy goes looking for tires to burn, let me just point out that we have an option to continue taking questions until 11:30. We're currently about 7 minutes past the point that we would have taken the break. I do not want to be the person standing between you and your break. So I'll leave it up to you all if you'd like to ask some more questions or if you'd prefer to adjourn for the break and return here in a little while for the open forum. Yes? There's a sense that a break is a good thing? Or we want to continue? I don't know. Are there more questions on the floor?
Ambivalence.
There's
Ambivalence.
a rumor of break in the back. Murmur break.
Ambivalence. All right.
So, okay, I thank you for your time and your questions, and we'll be back in a little while. Thank you.